Then do not drop your guard. Come.
Welcome to the second part of this series in which I discuss the banter system, some story related details on the Revenant and Atreus New Power, as well as the description of the ESRB rating. I have linked part 1 in the description just in case you haven't seen it already. If you watched my video on what I wanted to see at PSX this year, you'll probably know that I'm disappointed about not seeing more of the moment-to-moment gameplay. I thought perhaps that they would show an extended version of the clip from Paris Games Week where we get to see what happens after Kratos opens the gate. The showcase in 2016 at E3 doesn't really count because it won't be in the final build if you remember, but was intended to be a self-contained story to pitch the new direction. There are still a few question marks about how certain systems will work in-game, and I think it would have been cool to see at least one boss fight. I'm not really worried. In fact, everything I've seen so far dispels any fears about whether the Leviathan axe will be a worthy replacement for the chain blades. They seem to be on course for carving out their space in the action genre once again, as playing around with the axe by throwing it and then calling it back to you at any time seems like it will give players a fresh sense of power in the same way the blades did back in the original. I just find it a bit odd that we haven't seen more raw action. At the same time, it is possible that they would rather spend time on polishing the game in its final stages as opposed to taking time away from that to work on something else. It's not a big deal overall, because looking across social media to gauge interest, it's clear that a lot of people are already really hyped, which does speak volumes for the quality of the footage that we have seen so far. It was acknowledged right away that Atreus was speaking too much in that clip. It was then that we were introduced to the banter system, which is basically the system for Atreus' ability to talk to you in-game. While most people liked what was shown, there was a common complaint that Atreus was being annoying. He told us that while the issue has been addressed, there is still some work to be done on this system. Needless to say, I think those with concerns previously can put them to bed, as you can tell that Corey is very conscious about Atreus being a burden on players. After leaving the Huldra mines, we get a jump scare from a Revenant in the spirit of Halloween. They were first revealed in this shot here from the trailer at E3, but we didn't know their name until recently when a clip from the Lost Pages was uploaded. In the description, it says the latest Lost Pages catalogue the Revenant, a creature twisted by zealous devotion to Seidr Magic. It was further elaborated at PSX that they were practitioners of Seidr who lost their humanity after practicing it for so long. They are essentially possessed by this magic and have been physically and mentally warped in the process. If you have been following all my videos, you'll know that I've mentioned Seidr quite frequently, so it's a pretty big deal that its existence has finally been confirmed in the God of War universe. It is the most powerful form of magic in the Norse world, and playing with that source of power should ultimately come with a cost. We now have a representation of the risks involved in the form of the Revenant. If you are new to my channel or simply want a recap, Seidr Magic can be used to see into the future or even alter the course of someone's destiny. The practitioner enters into a trance with a staff in their hand and is said to travel in spirit's form to accomplish their task. It is mainly used for going into the future to tell prophecies, but can also be used to discover hidden details in your mind or in physical locations. The seer, known as Grower from the first set of Lost Pages, appears to be the most powerful practitioner of this magic, who Odin took advantage of, and her mind did not become warped despite being able to see until the end of the world. The Norns are the masters of Seidr, however, because they are the Norse equivalent of the Fates from Greek mythology. These three beings carved the destinies of children into the trunk of the world tree Yggdrasil, and they are probably responsible in some way for Atreus' curse. It was speculated at one point that this shot of the Revenant here were the Norns, and I like that we see three here because it is a symbol of what happened when these three witches tried to ascend to that type of godhood. I still think this form of magic might be what Kratos wants in order to lift Atreus' curse, and the Revenants are signs of what could happen if it goes wrong. Not even the gods were powerful enough to use Seidr to prevent their death at Ragnarok, which certainly raises the stakes for whether it is possible for Kratos to alter destiny with this method. After the presentation, we got a few more tidbits of information in the form of a video titled A Call from the Wilds at PSX. The first image we see is of the hut from the very first E3 demo, where Atreus and his mother live with Kratos. The camera then moves to a picture of Atreus looking dissatisfied because of frustration at his archery skills. To the right of Atreus, we can see the same figures that he was playing with at the beginning of the first reveal. Thanks to the exhibit at PSX, we now know who each of them are. The bigger one with tusks is called the Death Merchant, and the one beside it is Thor, which you could have guessed from Atreus referring to a hammer when enacting the fight.
Roar! That dumb hammer doesn't scare me. Boom! Oh no!
Boy.
Stop!
Boy!
The smaller pair of figures that we see on the right side are of the well-renowned dwarven blacksmiths Brock and Sindri. You will note that we got a better look at them in the E3 trailer shown this year. You will also remember a horse that Atreus kicked, and it is just generically described as horse even though it has 6 legs. I initially thought that it might have been Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, because it kind of looked like it had 8 legs from an angle, but it definitely isn't. It isn't Svartalfari either, who is the horse that fathered Sleipnir, because it was a stallion with 4 legs instead. The most plausible theory is that there is just a subspecies out there with 6 legs. Signs are still pointing to Odin's horse being in the game, as Corey and community manager Aaron Kaufman were spotted wearing t-shirts with Sleipnir on them. Its outline can also be seen frequently on the God of War website. Going back to the portrait of Atreus, we know that the shadowy figure behind him is his mother. The fact that her identity is shrouded in secrecy certainly lends credence to the theory that she is someone significant. My money is on her being a Vanir goddess. It would explain how her family came to be in possession of the Leviathan axe, which was crafted to bring balance to Thor's endless violence, and the Vanir were at war with the Aesir. I don't think it's the woman that we saw in the trailer, because she is generically referred to as the witch in the forest on the official website. Kratos was often out on mysterious long day hunts, which helps explain why he doesn't really have a close relationship with his son in some of the dialogue. Atreus spends most of his time with his mother, who teaches him every day about the ancient Norse language, archery, and the creatures of the Norse wilds. He was already reading and writing the Elder Futhark runic alphabet, and he crafted his own journal using materials from the forests of Midgard. According to the display at PSX, Atreus' journal holds every last mystery and ancient secret discovered on the legendary journey that he and his father Kratos embarked on together across the brutal Norse wilds. I imagine that it'll be an item you can pull out at any point in the game to document the things that you learn on the journey and to help with puzzle solving. Because all of his knowledge comes from stories and teachings, you'll see the distinction between theory and reality play out a lot throughout their adventure. An example is their encounter with the Soul Eater, where Atreus thought of it as this very aggressive creature based on his mother's description of its ability to harvest souls. It turns out that it is actually a passive creature unless provoked. The video then goes on to tell the story of Atreus' first journey out of the forest that he grew up in. The interesting but startling revelation that we get is that Atreus can hear the thoughts of others, and he ventured out because he could not resist the voices shouting in his mind, including the one that called for help. The narrator further elaborates that he isn't able to control it and that it was mainly the thoughts of animals, so this power is still in its infancy and has yet to grow. Kratos and Atreus' mother don't know about it either, and I think it is only a matter of time before he is able to hear the thoughts of other humans and gods, which can't end well. As he makes his way through the wilds of Midgard, we are told that he imagines himself as the Norse gods travelling to the other realms on the world tree Yggdrasil, which I think is represented in this artifact on display. Ullr and Tyr are mentioned in particular. I thought this was quite funny because it may have been an intentional nod to the fans who were speculating that Kratos' son would be either Tyr or Ullr. These were the top 2 candidates after all. Moving on to the ESRB rating, it is written that this is an action-adventure game in which players assume the role of half-human, half-godlike Kratos as he battles supernatural forces with his son. From an over-the-shoulder perspective, players travel through the Norse wilderness and use axes, double-chained blades, and swords to battle various enemies, for example rival gods, demigods, monsters, dragons, and skeleton warriors. It is intriguing to see the word axe referred to in its plural form, suggesting that the Leviathan axe won't be the only one, and the mention of swords affirms that there will be some variety to Kratos' arsenal. I think it's obvious that Kratos will butt heads with the Norse gods at one point, especially when you take the destructive regime of the Aesir gods into account. We have also seen monsters such as trolls, dragons, and the skeleton warriors refer to the Draga. The part that stood out the most to fans, including myself, was the fact that Kratos will be using double-chained blades in this game. But how could that be when the Blades of Exile fell off at the end of God of War 3? I am about 90% sure that it means we'll get the chance to play at least one flashback of Kratos' life in ancient Greece. I don't think Kratos will somehow get them again while on this new journey with Atreus because of what they represent. I would draft an explanation myself, but Corey put it so eloquently in an interview with Games Radar. We were experimenting with lots of different weapons, lots of different things. I think we wanted to create an identity because to me, the blades represent a very dark time in Kratos' life. They are not just a weapon to him, they are his scarlet letter. They are the marking that somebody tricked him, that he made a bad deal, that he made a mistake. Powerful, but I think also powerfully charged in its emotion. So I think part of him wanting to move forward is being able to leave the blades behind. The gods of Olympus gave the blades to Kratos, and he had what you might call an unhealthy relationship with Ares and company. The blades represented years of deceit and servitude, and lots of killing. Story aside, putting the blades aside was also a new start for the designers. So what else adds support to the theory that we'll get to use the blades again in a flashback? Well, for one, we know that Kratos still suffers from the nightmares of his past, which are probably even worse after the events of God of War 3. When asked whether Zeus or Deimos would make an appearance, Corey did not flat out say no either. It's possible that we play through a sequence in one of his nightmares, and I have always liked the idea of playing through the night that Kratos becomes the ghost of Sparta. It is at the heart of Kratos' origin, and coupled with Atreus' ability to hear the thoughts of others, it is possible that this is how he finds out about what happened to his half-sister Calliope. When he says to Kratos that he knows the truth in the trailer from E3 this year, I think it might have been because the world serpents let slip that he knows about Kratos ending the reign of the Greek gods. But I don't think Atreus has the entire picture from Kratos' response. I am definitely leaning towards playing through events that we haven't experienced before. I just have that particular night in my mind because it always comes back to haunt Kratos, and it was why he wanted to commit suicide at the end of the original God of War when the gods did not come through on their promise to take away his nightmares. It's also why he tried to kill himself again in God of War 3, but ends up being cursed to walk the earth forever as this tragic figure who can't escape his punishment. I know some of you are curious about how they could make the blades work with this new camera angle, but they could always revert to the old viewpoint for these sequences or find a way for it to function from an over-the-shoulder perspective. If someone had told you before the third God of War that you'd be using the blades in first person, you would probably be scratching your head, but when it's being used for narrative reasons and not for pulling off stylish combos, I think it becomes a bit easier to execute. The rating summary further goes on to say that combat is frequent and often bloody, with characters punching and kicking each other repeatedly, using bladed weapons to slash, stab and impale enemies. Larger enemies and bosses are dispatched in more intense sequences of violence. For instance, Kratos slashing and stabbing a dragon's tongue, a character using an axe to hook and tear off an ogre's jaw, and during one sequence, players decapitate an imprisoned character and carry the severed head around. This should definitely quell the fears of those that were worried about violence being toned down for a more family-friendly experience. The only difference this time around is that the violence won't be as gratuitous, but more contextual in terms of depicting what that era was supposed to be like. So when Kratos dispatches with a large enemy or boss in a brutal way, it'll be because it was necessary to bring out his rage for survival at that time. I have my own theory as to why he ends up stabbing the tongue of a dragon, but that will be addressed in my next video. Ogres are also explicitly mentioned, but they appeared in the E3 trailer this year, so we already knew they'd be in the game, as did the severed head that we saw Kratos carrying around in this shot here. We will also hear curse words in this game, which is kind of strange for the series because profanity wasn't a thing at all in the other 7 games. The M for Mature rating was always earned from the violence and sex minigames. It should come as no surprise this explicit sexual content won't be in there this time around, because Corey tweeted a while back that the sex minigames are gone for good, and I guess it's also because Kratos is now raising a young boy on this new adventure. So the next video I'll be uploading will be an extensive 40-minute analysis on the trailer from E3 2017 and all of the lost pages that have been revealed so far. I would like to take this opportunity to wish you and yours a very happy new year. 2018 is finally the year that we'll get to play God of War on PS4, and boy does that feel great to say. I will see you guys in my analysis on the lost pages of Norse myth.